Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of the ITSM Crowd. This is the regular get together that we have with members of Team Mentor, the people that support delegates from the ITSM Zone website. And what we do with these hangouts is we just try and share some experience, deal with a particular topic, and give everybody who's watching some practical things that you can go back to the office and try out in your own organisation to improve service and how you work with the business. Today's topic is I love BC, BC being business continuity, and I'm joined by 4 of our mentors. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and just explain a little bit about what they do and who they are. So working from left to right on my screen, we'll start with Barclay. Barclay, if you just want to say hello and introduce yourself.
Hello, yeah, my name is Barclay Ray, and I used to work for the Minions, but they deserted me, and now I do IT service management, and it's much more rewarding. I've been doing that for about 25 years, as a consultant and as an analyst. And if you can't hear me very well today, I've got serious man flu, so apologies for that.
Paul Barclay. Thank you for struggling through for us. And Daniel, if you want to say hello.
Hi, my name is Daniel Breston. I'm also part of IT service management. Used to be head of operations in IT for a number of different financial organizations, but now doing lean and DevOps. And my first experience in IT service management was around business continuity. So this is a very favorite topic of mine.
Brilliant, thank you. And Ryan?
Hi, I'm Ryan Ogilvie. I'm a ITSM consultant here in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And you may have seen my blog a few times, Service Management Journey, which I like to share with those in my, specifically in my community, and we work through some things, ideas and challenges that we face sometimes, especially here in Canada when we're geographically challenged, go to events, lots of things. It was the way to collaborate.
Yeah, Ryan's blog is definitely worth a look if you get a chance to have a read of it. It's usually posted on G+ as well. And last but not least, Suresh.
Hi everybody, nice to be here again. Thanks Claire for having us. My name is Suresh GP. I'm the Managing Director for Top Solutions, and I also represent the Board of Director at ITSM of India. I've been a service management consultant, practitioner, trainer. Recently I've done a few projects around business continuity management as well as enabling organizations on ISO 22301. So this is a good topic and very relevant to discuss in the amidst of chaos that happens in the industry today.
Brilliant, thank you. And just to say a quick introduction for me, so my name is Claire Agutter. I'm the lead tutor for ITSM Zone. We provide a range of service management training. And if anybody watching has any questions or comments that you'd like us to address during the Hangout, if you put them on Twitter using the hashtag ITSM Crowd, we'll be happy to make them part of the conversation. But the first thing that I wanted us to do today, just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing and everybody understands, is really just define what we mean when we say business continuity, because we talk about IT service continuity, we talk about business continuity. Let's have a think about the definition and exactly what we're discussing here. So Suresh, I don't know if you want to get us started on that one.
Sure. I think this is the most common problem that we face when we come to any organization. One is looking at business continuity at an organizational level, and then looking at service continuity. So for me, and I don't want to go into the terminologies from a definition of a book, but for me, anything related to a failure or disruption in the business, how well are you prepared in terms of a failure or a disruption happening to your business. So you might have to have a plan. The plan is on the books, but how do you execute it and make sure that it works to do that? But so business continuity at a higher level, and then service continuity falls underneath that. So I would look at that business at the encompassing overall overarching framework, which makes sure that you are able to sustain business as usual, which is very difficult in most of the instances that we are facing today. So that's how I look at ability to sustain irrespective of disruptions happening across.
Yeah, and I think that's a good definition. I mean, when we talk about business continuity, it's quite tempting to think disasters. So we tend to think about, fires, flood, theft of equipment. Is that a typical business continuity situation, or should we be thinking about other things rather than these natural disaster type events? Daniel, I don't know if you want to get in on that one.
I think the definition of the business in business based on the impact of what would happen if. And then you have to go and look at, so what would happen if? And we've done business continuity on target operating models. What would happen if Claire Agutter didn't come to work today? What would happen if there's a tube strike? I mean, that's not a natural disaster, but it's affecting, millions of people in London. Right now. What would happen if, and then you keep going with that. So you look at the impact and you decide whether or not you want to, what would you do if this happened? And it could be that I'll just ignore it. The chances of it or the cost of it is too much for me to deal with it, or it's too little for me to deal with it. But the other things of, people, structures, technology, and taking it outside of your organization, looking at the suppliers as well that you deal with. What would happen if you're an equities bank and the New York Stock Exchange goes down, you can't trade anymore. Now what do you do? So there's all kinds of different scenarios. It's a lot of fun at scenario mapping.
Yeah, absolutely. Ryan and Barclay, anything to add to that when we're talking about defining business continuity?
I think, at least in my geographic region, we're not really exposed to many, fortunately, natural disasters typically, but some of the things that do impact business, like Daniel was kind of pointing out, not everything is necessarily disaster related. In some cases, it could just be we had a transit strike a few years back, and the way that our city is spread out, most people have to use transit just to get into the city center. So for them, it was impacting businesses in a way that they had to devise a strategy to ensure that if people couldn't come physically to the office, that they had some method of being able to work from home or from some remote locations or things of that nature. So they were sort of testing out their disaster recovery, disaster plans in small amounts in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. And Barclay, have you got anything to add to this definition of what business continuity is?
I think one thing to bear in mind is that it does depend on the industry that you're in and the sector, how seriously they take it, and how they view it. So there are some areas where they have had to manage it from day one, in sort of safety environments. Financial services and others have been very hot on it for a number of years. But then you go to some other. A couple of years back, I was working for one of the media companies here in the UK, well-known brand, and they had no provision whatsoever. Nothing. They just hadn't thought about it, and I think sometimes the organisation itself drives it beyond the IT organisation. And that's worth being. It can be quite difficult for people in IT to get it on the agenda if it's not part of the business way of thinking. And as we all know, it takes to make it happen, or to get some money spent on it. Sometimes that's the only way, really.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're raising some common points there, which is that quite often business continuity is seen as IT's responsibility. So it's up to IT to arrange it. It's up to IT to kind of decide what will happen. But it's really important for the business to take it seriously and to kind of understand what business processes the IT is underpinning, because that helps set the criticality. And like you say, sometimes something really bad has to happen in order for the profile of continuity then to be raised and the business to start taking it seriously and think, actually, we might put some money into this. So for an organisation, what does good look like in terms of business continuity? What sort of things should an organisation be doing in order to kind of feel comfortable that it has its business continuity house in order, shall we say? And maybe Ryan, if you could get us started on that one. What does good look like for business continuity?
I think to start with, a lot of the challenges is, at least from what I've seen, is that a lot of organizations haven't really had something established. If they have, they said, well, we had some flooding last couple years ago, so a lot of companies didn't have anything in place. Put something in place. Is okay. Now we have something. We are good. And then it was like they said it. Now the challenge is that you have to, like a fire drill, you have to test these things out with some regularity, so that there's some comfort level from your business to say, okay, if something happens, we're pretty confident that our business is going to run based on these rules. We've had kind of flushed out some potential challenges that we would have in initiating our business continuity plan. We've flushed out when we know kind of the steps that are taking place and the comfort level of that. So I think for good, we have a relative term, but for the business to understand that we can work with IT or work with the business, I think it's important.
Okay, we've lost your audio a bit there, I think, Ryan. Suresh, if you want to give us your view on what good looks like for business continuity.
I think one of the problems that we have with the organizations developing a business continuity plan is they rely too much on documentation. And I was doing an assessment of one of the organizations on a BCP for 22301, and someone said, we have. So I asked a practical scenario: what happens if there is a sudden fire? What are you supposed to do? And I interviewed a person who was on the just joined the organization a couple of days back. And he said, he just stood wild and then said, I'll probably look at the internet and see what needs to be done. So the kind of imbibing the behavioral aspects as to what needs to be done and real-time practical aspects is not really done. If you don't have practical tests of how things might go wrong and how you could recover the service, there's no point in having a BCP, right? So it's just so that's one point. The second point is unearthing all the possible scenarios that could go wrong. I mean, I would agree with what Ryan said. That it's not that every time you have a disaster, a calamity, an earthquake, a flood, and other stuff. That's something which will talk in terms of the geographies that we're talking about and some seismic zones. But primarily, like kind of attrition, suddenly the power outage, and probably a bottleneck in terms of an attack, or some of these common scenarios will have to be explored in all different fashions, and then have to be realistic in terms of how much would be the recovery time, recovery point objective, and so on and so forth. So if you don't have those elements run through, then I would say that it might not be really good. And finally, the awareness level. People always think that Murphy's Law don't work here. They always think disaster is something that they don't expect it to happen. And that's where they fall a trap of it. So it doesn't come announced, right? It doesn't say, I'm going to come now, right? And many of these mock drills that they do is they give a pre-announcement that they're going to do a mock drill. The whole point is defeated, right? So some of these aspects in terms of preparing well, execution, as well as creating that awareness and being realistic is very important to test your validity of your BCP.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that there's there's a movement in organisations now thinking towards things like DevOps and being more agile as an organisation. There are a lot of organisations that are trying to become anti-fragile, and they're using tools like chaos monkeys to kind of disrupt their systems and their services and test how well they're able to recover. So we kind of move away from this idea of we've got this enormous plan and we test once a year just in case there's this enormous disaster, and what we're looking at really is the idea that at any point any of our systems could break, and we can use that break as a learning opportunity, and we might even bring those disruptions in ourselves in without notifying people, and that's going to help us be anti-fragile as an organisation. Daniel, what does good business continuity look like for you?
Trying not to make front page news. We would look at some of the local business magazines, and we would pick 3 articles every month, and we would add those articles to our monthly reports that went out to the senior management team. And the only question it was in the section called "Would this happen to us?"
Mm-hmm.
And over time, they started to look at these things, and they started asking, "Yes, this would happen to us. What do we have to do to make sure that it doesn't?" And we weren't just looking at IT-related issues. We were looking at, this particular building burned down, and what would happen if that happened here. It was all kinds of different types of situations, some of them severe, some of them not so severe. But just to try to get people to think about what would happen if. And as we started to bring these things out, people started to get what we were trying to ask in the continuity movement of, what would happen if. And I think the answer has to be, we agree that if this happened to us, good is we agree if this happens to us, we have an idea of how to, how to deal with it.
I think it all boils down to the kind of level of mental preparedness, right?
Yeah.
If you don't get to that level of mental preparedness, saying that how resilient you are, right? I think the concept of resilience becomes a victory. It's not about everything going perfectly in terms of high availability and stuff. Things are going to go wrong, right? Let's be honest. You're not going to have such kind of an environment, but how prepared are you to come back to normalcy? And mentally, how are you? How do you have the ammunition ready in terms of preparing for all the worst-case scenarios, and then getting into the limelight is quite critical, and that has to be on the face, right? I mean, it's not something that you prepare to mimic some situations and do that. So it has to be a level of rigorousness and preparation to stand upfront to face any adversity. That's how I look at the preparedness or the ability to withstand a BCP.
Yeah, I think you guys both bring up a really good point. I was at one organization that the first week, part of the orientation was they said, if there's ever a disaster, there's this giant binder in the operations center. We just follow it step by step. And we were at a team meeting, and there was a fire. There was an actual fire in the building. So as everyone exited, we realized that the binder was in the operations center that no one now had access to. So everyone was like, "Well, now what do we do?" And no one had kind of carnal knowledge of what to do, just even from a basic standpoint. So they said, "Well, we're totally lost." So we had to relook at how we set up our disaster plan. So it was almost like the POTUS silver briefcase type scenario where someone had to bring something with them because they really wanted to focus on this binder, and it was like this document that they had to have rather than having people that had general knowledge of what to do. And I think, as Suresh kind of pointed out, that there's value in having some knowledge record of these things, but there should be some skill in knowing what to do in the event of some sort of disaster, whether it's a real disaster or if it's just people can't get to work or what those things look like.
I think another thing is that people don't really think about what does it take to make a business a business. What employees do we really need to do today? What suppliers do we depend on? And if we have an issue, how will they respond? And if they have an issue, how will we respond? And they don't think about what makes a business, like Ryan was saying. If we have this particular situation, we need this documentation. Well, okay, where is that documentation going to be? And how are we going to get access to it? And it was like when the London bombings occurred, and everybody got kicked out of the Liverpool Street area, which is, several thousand individuals and large buildings are now pouring out. Everybody reached for their mobile phones, which didn't work because the entire mobile phone network had been taken over by the emergency services. So now thousands of people couldn't call their wife, couldn't call their clients, couldn't get a taxi, couldn't do anything. And we just don't think about what makes a business and really break it down at any type of level. And we need to start doing that. We need to start remembering that the goal of this is to keep the business in business.
Yeah, and I really like your idea, Daniel. I think that's a top tip about looking at the newspapers, looking at the stories in the newspapers and thinking, what would this mean for our organisation? I think, for a takeaway from this hangout, I think that's a brilliant idea, because quite often people do, they ask, where do we start? Where do we look at first? Look at what's happening and kind of learn from there. So the next thing really that I wanted us to discuss today, I'm conscious time's going by, is maybe share some stories of our own experiences of business continuity, and hopefully there'll be some lessons that can come out from there as well. One of mine is working with a large government agency who were very diligently doing backups of critical systems and taking those tapes off-site to another secure location so that they were stored and they were ready in the event of a disaster situation, but never at any point in the process actually testing those backups, and when they came to need them, finding out that those backups wouldn't work. So for backups, always test your backups. That would be one of the kind of the stories from my career. But Daniel, you've been teasing us with hurricanes and all sorts on Twitter, so we thought we might start with you and some of your business continuity stories.
I'll take your story a step further. We kept our tapes and we backed them up and we tested them religiously. What we didn't do was we didn't keep up with the technology of the old tapes. So we would take 1 month off, we would take the previous month and we would go, yes, that worked, everything was fine. But the 7-year rule, those tapes, we didn't have the technology or the systems or the applications to use them when the auditor walked in from the federal agency that was auditing us and saying, we'd like to see these records, please. And that cost a fortune to go and get the stuff in place to keep the business in business, to use those tapes that we had, but we didn't have anything to use them with. So now it was a different type of mentality of what do you do? The whole management structure around that. We hadn't taken the business impact that far because we never thought that anybody would go, can you go and restore this from 6 years ago? And technology doesn't last that long. So yeah, we'd replaced everything. But the 3 hurricanes and the buildings powering off and stuff like that. I mean, those things are. I think a lot of businesses now know how to deal with that stuff. It's the inadvertent things that occur that are truly not necessarily disaster situations, but impact your business that you need to think about and prepare for. And that's where going into the newspapers and looking, well, where have other people had issues? Or going to the Business Continuity Institute and looking at their horror stories.
Yeah, and that's another good resource, the Business Continuity Institute, for people to to look up as well. Ryan and Suresh, we seem to have lost Barclay, but Ryan and Suresh, have you got any stories from your careers that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, Ryan, you can go ahead. I'll be the last.
Okay, so last year we had an event called Snowtember. So even though I live in Canada, which we do get, I mean, we really do get snow a lot of it's cold a lot of the year, but September is still quite a warm month for us. And we had a weather situation that had come through. There was a lot of snow, and what it had done was it dumped something like, you know, 1.5 feet of snow overnight, and it made roads impassable. It broke in a bunch of power lines, so there was all kinds of challenges for people to get to work and for people to actually have electricity and things like that. So people didn't really think in those terms, and there's a lot of organizations that weren't prepared. And kind of the response from the city was, well, we can get things sorted out within 24 hours, which is really quick for a city the size that I live in. However, depending on the business, 24 hours could be like a lifetime. So making sure that you understand, you know, talking with your business, because as Daniel pointed out, business continuity is about making sure that they're going to be able to continue, understanding what 24 hours means to your business, what a week means to your business, things of those nature. I think that's really important. That was something we took away from that exercise.
Yeah. So if you look at, in my case, there were a couple of things which came out. We had a large network outage in one of the Castle accounts, which means it's a dedicated account where nobody else can actually access it, and it's dedicated to that particular customer account. So everybody is working down the clock, 24/7 support, doing that. But what happened was when the network outage happened, and we had to rely upon the supplier to get it fixed. It's not about technology. It was not about high availability. It was not about backup. But the communication was a phenomenal learning. One of the things that we had was someone who could front end as a kind of a crisis leader, whose only job was to communicate to the respective account heads on a regular intervals of what was happening and nothing to panic and how we are doing it. Because most of the times when this kind of situation occurs, people get a little bit panic because there's a lot of pressure, a lot of flurry of emails and stuff like that coming across from stuff. So someone needs a kind of a quiet space and time to take the lead and then communicate what needs to be done. I think that was that brought the nature of business impact to an order where people were saying, okay, things are under control, everything's okay. So you need to have a kind of a mentor and coach to facilitate the teams and say that, you know, we are in total control, right? I think that made a huge impact in the way people responded to the situation. So people, you know, there were a lot of freshers, there were a lot of people who did not have much experience. They were experiencing it the first time. There's a lot of high critical accounts with which are kind of a gold customer. But then slowly, as we started demonstrating with that kind of aspect, the technology and other stuff was a lot more easier to handle. So getting someone of that order and managing this as a team gives them a lot of experience and on-the-ground experience to handle things a lot more better. So I think that was my significant learnings, to keep a cool head when some things are not going the way it's working, but put your best foot and communicate and explain and mantle the whole team in the direction of recovering back your service.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic advice, and I think having that person who is in charge, who has got a cool head, who isn't running around panicking, that can make a big difference. If, like Daniel says, you do end up on the front page of the newspapers, you've got to manage the communication and manage the message around it if this becomes a public thing, and yeah, that's definitely the case. So we're actually at the end of our time for today, but this has been a brilliant hangout. Thank you so much to Barclay, to Daniel, to Ryan and to Suresh. I think there's been some invaluable advice and tips there to help people with their own business continuity efforts. The next hangout we're doing is on the 12th of August, and that's a special business relationship management one. We've got a guest from the Business Relationship Management Institute, so I hope you can join us then. Bye. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Claire.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.